Some important vocabulary for 6.3 when we start talking about fractions and decimals on a number line kind of goes back to what we talked about in section 6.1. Negative fractions and decimals do exist. They just can't be considered integers because in 6.1 we said integers had to be whole numbers even if they were positive or negative. But positive and negative fractions and decimals get called rational numbers. We won't use that term very often, but at least you'll have it for the future. For example 1, we're going to be graphing negative fractions and decimals, and for letter A they want us to graph 3/4, but they also want us to graph its opposite, so remember when you're reading directions to watch for that. And in this case I've gone ahead and set up a number line, and you'll want to do the same. And you can see that I've only gone out as far as really 1 and -1, but I've included some of the fractions in here, and since I can see I'm going to be graphing in fourths, I made my denominator fourths along the way. So after 0 to the right, I've got 1/4, and then 2/4 in simplest form is actually 1/2, so I put it as 1/2, but this is just a reminder here. And then 3/4, 4/4 of course would be the same thing as 1, and then you would keep on going 1 and 1/4, and then just like all our number lines, then we've got the same thing on the left side except going the opposite direction. So -1/4, -1/2, again same as -2/4, -3/4, -1, and -1 and 1/4. And to graph that, we'll just look at our 3/4 here, put a dot right on that tick mark right there, and then -3/4 would be the opposite of it because it's the same distance from 0 but in the opposite direction, and that's all you would have to do for that one. For letter B, we're going to be graphing -1.6 and its opposite, and again when you set up your number line, pick any increments or intervals that work for you. But when I look at a number like -1.6, I start to see things like 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 working well. So I'm going in 4/10 chunks here. So 4/10, 8/10, 1 and 2/10, 1 and 6/10, and then the number 2. And then the opposite on the left of 0 is -4/10, -8/10, -1 and 2/10, -1 and 6/10, and -2.0. And our first number to graph is -1 and 6/10, so we're going to go right there. And then the same distance from 0 but in the opposite direction puts us out, of course, at +1.6, so we're going to graph that one as well. In example 2, we're going to be comparing fractions and mixed numbers. So letter A asks us to compare -1/2 and -3/4. And the first thing we're going to want to do is to set up a number line. Most of our number lines so far have had 0 right in the middle, and then we've had all of the numbers that go to the positive side to the right and all the numbers to the negative side go to the left. But in this case, when we start looking at comparing them, we want to make sure the number lines match what we're comparing. So in this case, we've got -1/2 and -3/4. So I'm actually going to put 0 here at the right side of my number line and just work my way to the left. So I'm going to count in fourths again because those two denominators have 4 in common. So -1/4, -2/4 of course is the same thing as -1/2, -3/4, and then -4/4 is the same thing as 1 whole, and then going from there. And so when I first need to look at these, I'm going to graph them first. So I've got -1/2 here, and I've got -3/4 here. And the most important thing when you are comparing integers is to remember that anything on the left side or to the left would be the least or smallest, and anything going to the right would be bigger. So even though these numbers are both negative, anything to the left is a smaller number. So in this case, that means that -3/4 is a smaller number. But we're going to keep this number expression in the same order that it already came in. So -1/2, since it's to the right here, is a bigger or greater than number, -3/4, and that would be our final answer. Letter B asks us to compare negative 4 and 5/6 and negative 4 and 1/6. So again, we can pick up our number line anywhere we want. So I'm going to actually put my biggest number here at the right as negative 4, and I'm going to work my way down. And because these denominators are both in sixths, I'm going to go by sixths all the way until I get down to negative 5. So negative 4 and 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and then of course 6/6 would be your next whole number, so negative 5 here. And I'm not going to worry about putting things into simplest form, like 2/6 could be reduced, 3/6 could be reduced, 4/6 could be reduced, because both of these are already in the same denominator. So I'm not going to worry about simplifying them right now because I can compare them just the way they are. So negative 4 and 1/6 is here, and negative 4 and 5/6 is here. And again, when we go to do this, we're going to give it in the same order they ask us. So basically, we're going to fill that blank spot in with a greater than, less than, or equal to here in just a second. But we'll know because the negative 4 and 5/6 here is on the left, so it is less than the number on the right, which is negative 4 and 1/6. So this time we are going to say that the less than sign fits. In example 3, we're going to look at comparing decimals, and we already have done some work in the positive number decimal comparing, so we know that we can also line place values up sometimes, but it gets a little bit trickier on the negative side since everything is kind of opposite or flipped around. So a good thing to do here would be, again, to set up a number line, and then I'm going to go, since everything is still starting with a whole number 3, I'm going to go from negative 3 down to negative 4 here, and I'm going to count by tenths, so negative 3 and 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and then down to negative 4. And the negative 3 and 8/10 is not too bad because it's right on a tick mark there, so I'm going to do that one first. When I look at negative 3 and 8/100ths, I've got to remember that I didn't put any hundredths in here, but if you could picture our grid or our number square that we were doing with 10 rows and 10 rows across and everything there, every tenth here that we have is going to be made up of 10 100ths. So I'm thinking of less than 1/10, so I know I'm somewhere between negative 3 and negative 3.1. And it's going to be 800ths. So if you can kind of imagine that that would be pretty close to the negative 3 and 1/10, but not quite there, then I'm going to put the negative 3 and 800ths right there, and I am going to label that one since it's not directly on one of the marks that we have there. And again, we're going to finally go ahead and compare them in the order that the original question asked us. Negative 3 and 800ths compared to negative 3 and 8/10. And by looking at my number line, I can see that negative 3 and 8/10 comes first on the left, so it's less than negative 3 and 800ths, but since negative 3 and 800ths comes first on my question here, and it's over here to the right, that means it's greater than this number right here because this one is to the left. So negative 3 and 800ths is actually greater than negative 3 and 8/10 because it's closer to 0.